Okay, I'm back.
All right. You won't see me because I am gone, and I'm going to start the webinar, everyone.
Okay, bye, Starsha.
Bye. I'm still here in spirit. Bye,
Okay.
Jen. Oh, sorry, Jen, you didn't hear me. Okay, I'm dark, but I'm gonna start the webinar, okay?
Okay, hold on. Let me just put the right window. Okay.
You ready?
Yes.
And then you can start, I know it's like already 6:03, so you can start really at any point. I mean, you'll see when the participants start to stop. But I think you'll see it at the bottom. Okay. Okay, I'm going.
Okay.
But you can always ask me and I'll just say yes. There we go.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome. We're letting everyone file in virtually here. Hello, everyone. Looks like people are still filing in. Okay. Welcome. My name is Jennifer Scapitone, and I teach here at the University of Chicago, whose creative writing program has sponsored this special event. And I want to acknowledge, first of all, that our campus occupies the traditional homelands of the Three Fires Confederacy of Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi nations, and that Chicago has been a site of gathering, trade, and healing for more than a dozen other Native tribes, including the Miami, Ho-Chunk, Menominee, Sac, and Fox. We have been able to invite Mei-mei Berssenbrugge to campus this evening virtually due to a bequest honoring the life and work of former University of Chicago student Pearl Andelson Sherry. Pearl Sherry was born on the west side of Chicago in 1899. Despite objections from her father, she attended the university for 1 year, from 1916 to 1917. At the University of Chicago, Pearl Sherry joined a group of young writers and poets that included Ever Winters and Janet Lewis, who remained lifelong friends. Sherry began her own writing career working at Poetry Magazine with Harriet Monroe. Her first book of poetry, Fringe, was published in 1923. And over the span of 97 years, her poetry, fiction, and reviews appeared in such journals as The Dial, The New Republic, and The Southern Review. In 1997, the Sherry family made a gift to the university to support an annual reading by a distinguished visiting poet. I would now like to formally introduce the 2022 Sherry poet, Mei-mei Berssenbrugge. She will then read for a while. The two of us will chat for a while, and we will close by opening the floor to questions from the audience, which you can enter into the chat box. Born in Beijing, her mother's native city, and raised in Massachusetts, Mei-mei Berssenbrugge currently lives with her husband, the sculptor Richard Tuttle, between northern New Mexico and New York City. Educated between Barnard, Columbia, and Reed, she has taught in a variety of contexts at the Institute of American Indian Art, at Brown, and in the Poets in the Schools programs in Alaska. She is the author of 15 volumes of poetry, including Hello the Roses, Empathy, and the delectably, perhaps ironically titled I Love Artists. These books, with their signature wide horizon line jutting past standard shelvable dimensions, act as conduits for currents of influence from this transcontinental experience within and outside of letters, with near tactile feats of weaving, of making kin, in Donna Haraway's phrase. These currents include the New York and language schools of poetry, post-war abstraction in music and the visual arts, the Basement Workshop, a 1970s collective of Asian American poets, artists, and activists, philosophy from Wittgenstein's Remarks on Color to Gayatri Spivak, quantum physics, and close attention to oral cultures of all kinds, from classical and indigenous cosmology to contact narratives. As a believer, and one might say a practitioner in nonlinear time, Berssenbrugge pulls these together in radiant simultaneities. Describing her verse as kinesthetically conceived rather than being oriented toward perception, Berssenbrugge often collaborates with friends across the visual and performing arts. The fruits of these collaborations include the artist's books, Endocrinology with Kiki Smith and Hiddenness with Richard Tuttle, and Sphericity with Richard Tuttle and Endocrinology with Kiki Smith, as well as performances and theater works with Shizhen Chen, Frank Chin, Blondell Cummings, and Alvin Lucier, among others. In 2021, she was awarded the prestigious Bollingen Prize for Poetry for her lifetime contributions to American poetry. And she earlier won 2 Before Columbus American Book Awards, as well as a host of other honors from the Asian Writers Workshop, the NEA, and Penn West. Her most recent volume, A Treatise on Stars, which you should order now through the Seminary Co-op if you don't already have it, was published by New Directions in 2020. It was also a finalist for the National Book Award, whose jurors called it, quote, a breathtaking record of biological, chemical, and spiritual entanglement. And to this, one could add geological, aesthetic, cosmic entanglement for starters. I first encountered this work with its attention to the fragile and everywhere punctured boundary between heaven and earth, life and death, in the moment of pandemic lockdown. It teaches that viruses transpose our DNA and that of mosquitoes, reminds us that the earth perpetually receives dust, meteorites, and asteroids smashing to scatter their bacteria and send ours back out. Treatise hails from the Latin for handle, draw, pull. It's about attraction. This treatise insists, sentence after sentence along this author's signature verse expanses, on this level of attunement and pull across species and scale, in a manner similar to, but far more vulnerable than, Charles and Ray Eames's masterwork, Powers of 10. Berssenbrugge once created a pin reading simply, quote, I don't know, unquote, in conjunction with a Richard Tuttle exhibition. This brave negativity leads to a disarming permeability of truths. Respect is a portal, augurs a treatise. As the poet's antennae pick up and superimpose the communications of dolphins, shamans, and innocent co-op checkers who have seen aliens in an amalgamative time space of nonlinear sentences, it insists on a higher order of unity through love. This she also calls consciousness. In so doing, her latest volume aims to press and to pull us, quote, beyond environmental fear and grief. A light of my 2020 was a rendezvous over Zoom with Mei-mei, in which we chatted about such seemingly extra-disciplinary subjects as environmental illness, New Age, and prayer. Berssenbrugge's brave faith in the continuity of consciousness as a field one can enter, and her persistence in pulling us into belief through poetry are a balm for these times. please help me welcome her.
Okay. Now, thank you, Jennifer. I'm going to try to get my screen just right.
Sure thing.
I see a big sign in the middle of my speaker. Okay, I hope that I can get myself on the screen. Well, that's better.
Okay.
Thank you very much for that beautiful introduction. And I'm so honored to be invited to the great University of Chicago, and I wish I were there in person. I thought I would read across my life and begin with a poem called Fog. I'll read a few sections from this poem called Fog, which is actually a text for the choreography of Theodora Yoshikami. It was and her Merida Dance Company. It was produced by the Basement Workshop, part of a trilogy about water. So I'm going to read 5 sections of it. Hundreds of millions of years ago, days were many hours shorter. All things, sounds, stories, and beings were related. And this complexity was not obvious. It was not simplified by ideas of relationship in one person's mind. Paths of energy were forced to stay in the present moment by being free of reference, making it impossible to focus on 2 things at once, and showing by its quietness that energy of attention is as much a source of value and of turbulence as energy of emotion. As lava burst from the ground to cover the planet, it also freed water, which escaped as massive billowing fog, a contradicting ambition of consciousness to acquire impressions and retain strong feeling. Fog is a kind of grounded cloud, composed like any cloud of tiny drops of water or of ice crystals forming an ice fog. Since water is 800 times denser than air, investigators were long puzzled as to why fogs did not quickly disappear through fallout of water particles to the ground. It turns out that the drops do fall, but in fog creating conditions, they are buoyed up by rising currents, or they are continually replaced by new drops condensing from water vapor in the air. Their realism is enhanced by smoothing away or ignoring discontinuities in the fog for images of what we really see when we travel. Beautiful, unrepeatable, fleeting impressions can be framed only within the contradicting ambition of her consciousness to acquire impressions and to retain her feeling, a way of repeating a dream. Large areas of the sky change from totally transparent to nearly opaque within a few minutes, although throughout a lifetime, the night sky appears remarkably constant, showing what they are without revealing what they are. Paths of energy are transformed at the moment before their dissemination into an empty field, like dew you see on a spider web when the sun hits it after there were spiders. It has no shape or color that is stable. As if I had fallen asleep and a long bridge appeared, where my relatives are like companions crossing a bridge. Her friends and family are like people you meet at the marketplace. When you look at her husband, you think of a floating flag of the roof. Even though he is your husband, he is not stable. Anyone believes what anyone says about you. This realm or field in which other people exist in subtler forms than the body in daylight. This is a realm or field in which other people exist in subtler forms than the body in daylight. A part of the person can become visible at a time, or parts of the people, and other parts rest in folds of the fog, as if they were muffled sounds. It would be hard for you to believe that anything within the cloud exists. His body, which you do not see, exists, having dissolved its cells into a body of a cloud which shifts in and out of focus. It would not decay. The body is the space of the point of a moment in your seeing him or hearing him. You can calm yourself by moving toward one of these points, the way you move along your own breath. This fog in space and light and dark is analogous to the solid ice of a very pure environment and how it cracks and gets water from one stage to another. Its area of white space varies in lightness from place to place, but does it look foggy to her in the darker places? The shadow that a cloud casts is in part darker. She sees the parts of the space that are farther away from the light as darker, but still white, even though she would have to add black to depict it. Looking around in her room or any wide space in the evening, she can hardly distinguish among the people around her, and now becomes physically frightened of them. And now illuminate this space and describe each one you saw in the mist. There are pictures of dreams in rooms in semi-darkness. But how can she compare the people in these pictures with those she saw in semi-darkness? As soon as she sees the person, perception is blocked by the desire to go toward the person, with a misunderstanding of fog as thought that just runs on and on. Her awareness is completely lost in distracting clearings of space. The first solution which occurs to us for the problem of the appearance of another person is that ideas of actual feeling instead of the appearance of feeling refer to points of tiny intervals or patches in the other person. How are we to compare the feelings between two such intervals simply by letting one's memory move from one to the other? If you do this to me, if you remember me, how do we feel this feeling has not changed in the process? If you do remember correctly, how can we compare the feeling without being influenced by what has happened since. The way we call a complex of intervals with which you depict the family member, his emotion with respect to you, as if the person were a piece of rose-colored glass. Would he have the same emotion in a crowd as a piece of rose-colored paper? A storyline develops based on your moving from one breath to another, and you start to want to continue it like a span of good health or exceptional beauty. You want to continue it forever, and your memory gets involved in how you perceive the space around you and the human beings or descendants in the space. You will eventually feel so empty inside among your family and in your memory of your family that even while you continue breathing, your breath will not bring volume or space into your lungs. The last section. They counted her more accurate and more inaccurate memories as black and white stones. The more accurate memories turned out to be white on the outside, but they were unconditioned by the desire to form story out of her memory. Continuing story, the way we wish this space and light to continue. Therefore, we appreciate fog as the power to make the space continue beyond a single perception into raw material or youth of the body, like a body of light. It dissolves now at the top of her head, now 5 lights into her heart. Now it dissolves into her body. Her friends dissolve into light. They dissolve into her family, which seems to dissolve into clouds that were already full of light. It is not so much the quality or brightness of light or her understanding of this light as the number of times she dissolves. The faster she can dissolve into the space, the better. It is almost as if the complete dark would be ideal. I enjoy remembering the performance of that with, it was abstract, a stage with scrims and scrims of light that were the mist. Okay. My book, Hello, the Roses, was, Fog came from, was part of my collection called Empathy. And that was published in 1989, but it was just reissued by New Directions Press. So Hello, the Roses. In this book, I began to think about communicating with animals, and then I moved to plants, and then I tried to move outward to the weather. Plants continue to be an enduring topic for me. This is the title poem in 2 sections. And it's Hello, the Roses. My soul radially whirls out to the edges of my body, according to the same laws by which stars shine, communicating with my body by emanation. When you see her, you feel the impact of what visual can mean. Invisibility comes through of deep pink or a color I see clairvoyantly. This felt sense at seeing the rose extends, because light in the DNA of my cells receives light frequencies of the flower as a hologram. The entire rose, petals and moving air, emotion of perfume records as a sphere. So when I recall the emotion, I touch dimensionality. From a small bud emerges a tight wound bundle of baby skin coral petals, held in a half globe as if by cupped hands. Then petals are innumerable, loose, double, sumptuous, unified. I look through parted fingers to soften my gaze, so slow light shining off the object is filtered. Then with feeling, I look at swift color there. It's swiftness that seems still as noonlight, because my seeing travels at the same speed. I make a reciprocal balance between light falling on the back of my eye to optic nerve to pineal gland, radiance stepping down to matter, and my future self opening out from this sight. A moment extends to time passing as sense impression of a rose, including new joys where imagined roses I haven't yet seen or seen in books record as my experience. Then experience is revelation, because plants and people have in their cells particles of light that can become coherent, that radiate out physically and also with the creativity of metaphor, as in a beam of light holographically, that is by intuition, in which I inhale the perfume of the bourbon rose. Then try to separate what is scent, sense, and what you call memory. What is emotion? Where, in a dialogue like touching, is it so vibratory and so absorbent of my attention and longing, with impressions like fingerprints all over? I'm saying physical perception is the data of my embodiment, whereas for the rose, scarlet itself is matter. The rose communicates instantly with the woman by sight, collapsing its boundaries, and the woman widens her boundaries. Her rate of perception slows down because of its complexity. There's a feeling of touching and being touched. The shadings of color she can sense from touch. There's an affinity between awareness and blossom. The rose symbolizes the light of this self-affinity. I come to visit drooping white cabbage roses at dusk. That corner of the garden glows with the quality of light I might see when light shines through mist or in early morning reflects off water. I stand quietly and allow this quality to permeate air around me. Here, with the white rose, color is clairsentient. This color in the process of being expressed, like seeing Venus in the day. Walking, I move in and out of negative space around which each rose is engaged and become uncertain of my physical extent as an object. Look at the energy between people and plants. Your heart moves into depth perception. For depth, read speed of light. I set my intention through this sense of moving into coherence with the biophotons of a plant and generate feeling in response. A space opens and awareness gathers it in. As at night, my dream is colorless and weaves into the nuance. I can intentionally engage with the coherence of light beams, instant as though light less, or the colored light of a dimension not yet arrived, as our hearts are not outside affinity with respect to wavelength, shaping meaning, using the capacity for feeling to sense its potency in a rose and to cultivate interbeing with summer perfume. I can't decide which of these poems to read. This poem called "The Loom" is a fictional, a name for a fictional constellation. The next two poems I'm going to read from my book, A Treatise on Stars. I had the intuition that to try to write about the heavens and the earth as one ecosystem. So there's back and forth of perception and communication and travel from Earth to the stars. I have a persona in some of these poems that's a academic or anthropologist, and there's a kind of ambiguity between the facts of research and intuition. So this poem is in 4 parts, and I would show her the night sky and point out certain stars. A person being of cosmic origin can become one with a star. Looking underlies unity between earth and sky. Through black holes, UFOs, star beings, ETs, collective memory, night influences our DNA. I point out the loom. A small white star is the crosspiece. Brightness on depth grants shape and placement. Pleiades, Andromeda, Aldebaran weave dimensions of dark, light, and the invisible. Attention becomes thinking. Feeling divines a precise order of reality in imaginal space. We've greater power to participate in the rhythms of our place, enlivening a vertical ideational channel here to there as perception, a kind of breath made of transparency. In college, a young man took me to a hill near town to wait for star people, and I've continued looking for them. In starlight, I sense a pulse like breathing, but only the exhale of radiance to intensifying radiance as beauty. I focus on meaning flowing through seeing to shape an entity. intrinsic meaning is explicitly realized as the beingness of light. Birds, dolphins, whales use this more immediate communicatory alignment with meaning as Gestalt, song. Their cosmic relations illuminate us through an invisible matrix that does not emit or reflect light, attaching to Earth as being, a kind of gravity in infinity. I tell her Orion, dog star, Pleiades, Cassiopeia, their light and heat from our bodies commingle. I point out the flyway of images rising and descending like an axis, a tree, standing in our warm boots and jackets, absorbing data from above. We've always used trees to organize intelligence, and you will climb one to know with others that matter emanates from it. Its canopy spreads into the firmament to organize space-time, setting star fields in motion. I tell you, this upper world is real, experiential, conscious, and accessible to us by our response, because ramification is within. Your pulse aligns you with other light as a ladder of branches and leaves into heaven, with birds in the branches. Your focus is aliveness with another. We look with analog textile eyes at the dark field, generative gravity of consciousness, and the field moves toward us. It pulsates as if potentia and subject were shape-shifting with Earth. At what point is an observation complete if this consciousness is homogeneous, distributed? Upper and lower branches entangle as reference human culture. Night situates within nested, self-organizing narratives that ascend, such as, I am your mother, and consciousness is mother. Sometimes I brought the ET's flowers, sometimes a pretty rock. I tell her that rocks, like meteorites, retain light, a sensible energy thought into substance by experiencing it. All life is this coherence of light being emitted and received, then sometimes thought. By day, observation spreads out as waves. Milky Way is an invisible potential, and I can imagine a wave function for the universe. Up to now, cosmos manifested its fragments when observed by conscious beings. Conscious beings are like the morphogenesis of a capacity or sphere where cause doesn't exist. Particles stream back and forth in narrative lines, and wonder as scale stabilizes our uncertainty by welcoming light. This state with enough new information for intelligence and enough ground for us. Being is not the straight line a photon travels, but fractal, like the edge of a borealis. Its locus is our recognition that ebbs and flows. I transcribe a text, a weave that emits and reflects light, in which a universe less compatible would be invisible. I live most of the time in northern New Mexico. I've been there for almost 50 years. And this poem, Wonder, is situated in New Mexico. Oh, I take in local places. It's in five parts. One summer night, walking from our house after dinner, stars make the sky almost white. My awe is like blindness, wonder exchanges for sight. Star by star comprises a multiplicity like thought, but quiet, too dense for any dark planet between, while single stars are a feature of the horizon at dusk, caught at the edge of the net of gems. Transparence hanging on its outer connectedness casts occurrence as accretion, filling in of extravagant, euphoric blooming. Then being as spirit and in matter is known here to there. I go home and tell my children to come out and look. The souls of my two children fly up like little birds into branches of the Milky Way, chatting with each other, naming constellations, comparing crystals and fire. They exclaim at similarities between what they see in the sky and on our land. So by wonder, they strengthen correspondence between sky and home. Earth is made from this alchemy of all children, human and animal, combined with our deep gratitude. I see his dark shape moving and shifting against night's screen of stars. My little girl reaches for his lighted silhouette. Human beings are thought upward and flown through by bright birds. We believe stars are spirits of very high frequency. We feel proud our animals come from stars so dense in meaning, close to sacrament. We describe time passing in stories about animals. Star movement is named for seasonal migrations of deer, wolf, hummingbird, dolphin, and as animals, stars still walk among us. Our snake Olivia, for example, tells us there is no conflict between humans and rain because resource is all around us. A coyote loved night, and he loved to gaze at the stars. I noticed one star in Cassiopeia. I talked to her, and each night she grew brighter and closer until she came to life here as a corn snake, my friend. She looks like a dancer on tiptoe, stepping around pink star blossoms, surging up after rain. Constellations are experienced emotionally as this play of self through plant and animal, symbols and values. A dream atmosphere flows. Everything represented is sacred. Being moves in accord, not of time. Returning from the Milky Way, she realized crystals had fallen from her bag and looked up. My story links a journey to sky with the creation of stars, in which place accommodates becoming. Chama River flows north-south to the horizon, then straight up through the Milky Way, like water moving beneath a riverbed that's dry. Abiquiu Mountain, El Rito Creek, coyote, snake, rainbow, and rain, spider and hummingbird identify equivalent spiritual placements above. So wherever we go, there is company, nurture from every star in our regard. Richard, I'm giving my reading. I start up to ask my birds to return home and find our land continuous with a starry sky mapped as entities who set into motion occurrence here. Place awaits an imprint from this potential, even though starlight arriving now already happened. What happens is a depth of field before and after drought, fire, storm disruption. I move at high speed, but I'm still standing beside my house in the dark. To go there, I find the place on our mesa that correlates to their tree in the sky and leap up. Space stirs as star trilliums emerge through darkness like humus. I ask one blossom to please in the future renew these bonds between sky and my children, so they will always hold light in the minerals of their eyes. Sun on its nightly underground journey weaves a black thread between white days on the cosmic loom. Chord or resonance between new experience and meaning. The origin of stars expresses the underlying warp of this fabric. Summer solstice draws a diagonal across my floor. Precession, weaving ground of informing spirit. So therefore, life is fundamental to stars. The reverse is well known. That's why I don't use a telescope, star charts, or glasses when I go out. I think of a place, I wait, then fly to my children. When the stargate is raised, there is a narrow door between sky and ground. But when I arrive, I find the sky solid. I can't break through to visit my starbirds and stand there wondering before dawn. Then sky vault lifts. Maybe I can slip through to find the Milky Way and see its blossoms. Then our sun appears in the crack and pushes through to the day. It's so bright, so hot. I step back and cover my eyes. I hear my mother calling. Okay, let's see where we are in time. I think maybe we can stop there.
Thank you so much, Mei-mei. It was such a treat to have that overview of your life's work and to move across scale from water to botanicals to the stars. We had said that we would give Mei-mei a chance to stretch.
I'm just going to stand up.
Yes, so the human need to move in space. So while she does that, I'm going to invite people to use the chat box to, if you have any questions, to write them in the chat. I'm going to start us off because, yeah, being confronted with all that, it does take everyone a while to gather their thoughts. So I pre-gathered mine, and I've really enjoyed steeping myself in Mei-mei's work, and also other conversations that people have had with Mei-mei over the years, of which there are many, and they cover so many different sorts of terrain. But because you started out with fog, I thought that I would ask you about rhythm and the kinesthetic. You've described your work as kinesthetic, and we got to hear from your collaboration with Theodora Yoshikami for the Morita Dance Company on Lafayette Street. And I think you actually performed that work alongside the four dancers.
My text was the music, so I just I read, and then so there I guess there had to be a rhythm, because there doesn't have to be a rhythm, but I think there was, and there were four dancers, and it was beautifully atmospheric.
So that must have, I mean, can you say more about it? It isn't the only time that you've worked with dancers, so how that may have informed your work thereafter. Like, it's one thing to write a text and have it, be a reading against which the dancers work. It's another when it's potentially interactive. And you've talked about revision and knowing when something is right in rhythmic terms. And so that's like another interesting, curious aspect about rhythm. Fog is prose poetry, right?
Yes, I think, yes, it is. It's the only thing I've published. I think that's prose poetry.
Yeah. So
the others are long lines, but they're poetry lines. Yeah.
Right. So that's almost like a contradiction that the prose poem was moving with the dancers. And dance is famously elusive to writing, and I've just read less about your work with the dancers. So I just wanted to hear a little bit more about, how movement and space, may inform your poetics, because it seems like you return to that in a lot of conversations, whether it's the consciousness moving in space or whether it's an actual body moving in space.
Yeah, or the sun moving across the landscape. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the collaboration, I was new to collaborations, and we dived in. So the entwinement, Theodora, the entwinement grew spontaneously, and I think I'm trying to think, it was quite a long time ago when I think about it. Merce Cunningham famously has the dancers and the music as distinct parallel or distinct lines. And I think perhaps we were going, we were using that kind of model because we did not choreograph like lines to steps or anything like that. But I think it wasn't that. I once saw Merce Cunningham dance with, I think it was with Radiohead did the music, and they tormented Merce Cunningham by correlating the music to the dancers. But I would say that the correlation came by by our feeling for each other. And that was what synchronized the words and the movement. The space, that was a long time ago, but space has continued to be the primary subject for me because of, I think primarily because of where I live and the wide landscape of New Mexico, and that I chose to live. Richard, I'm picking up. My husband forgot. You can say hello if you want. Okay. So
you were saying you chose to
that
live.
place to live, and it is an enduring daily engagement for. It's a wide horizon, and then the light moves across it. So I live on a mesa, and the sun moves across it, so it's just changes every minute, and that is, I guess, my world, my life, and I think you can move into the space that consciousness makes, or you can move into the space of consciousness as night sky. Yeah, so the rhythms are, I think for the timing for my prosody is, don't know if that's the way it is for your poetry, but my timing is, I think, a gift or innate. It's not something I developed. It's something I learned across the years to trust or to try to recognize. It's there, but sometimes you feel like I'm careless about it. I think with the longer I work, the older I get, the longer I work, the more I trust those innate rhythms and work, labor for them. You know, I labor to have them say what they want to say. Yeah.
I love that paradox that you need to labor to let the rhythm say what they want to say.
Do you understand that?
I think it's kind of, yeah, about channeling something that is just right, but you know, you need to really work to be able to channel
That's
things,
true. Well,
you know, so that's where experience.
Or I also mean, when you write it down, you think, well, that should be good enough, but it's, you know, that's not what your innate rhythm is. So, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So what you were saying about the movement of the light on the mesa made me think about another culture that has influenced you, which is another landscape, which is Alaska. And in an interview with Arthur Zay, you were talking about a place that was disappearing and the toughness of life there and the toughness of the village sort of emptying out. But I was curious about what you meant by that, since in fog, you know, we move between water, ice, and fog. And so there's the spring breakup of the ice. And you've talked about your thought as being like ice flows. And so there's this kind of like haunting in your work and in your talking about it, of a landscape that's disappearing in a different way. And you were also in Dillingham, Alaska, you were kind of embedded with the Yupik oral culture. So I would love to hear more about the ways in which that affected your work and the sort of the disappearance, as a different kind of change in the landscape that you've tracked over years.
Yeah, I wonder what I meant. One thing that was when I did that was probably in the late 70s and early 80s. I went up to Alaska many times. Arthur did too. And maybe I was talking about the life is so determined, knowledge of survival and way of life is so strict and determined because it's such an extreme climate. And as soon as the first plane comes in, everything is different because you don't have to, your life is not determined, or if you didn't put enough food up this year, you die. But now there's planes, so that's completely different. So maybe I was talking about the way people understand, or the way they see their lives as, because the different cultures own land where oil was discovered. So in those days, in the early 80s, they had unbelievable amounts of money. And at the same time, the villages looked much like they always had. I might have been talking about that. Now I would talk about climate change and worlds disappearing in that way.
So do you think that is that still present when you're writing about the landscape now? Are you thinking of Alaska?
I'm completely, no, that the poem Alakanak Breakup was one of the trilogies to the dance. No, I haven't written about Alaska in a long time. It was a very special time that I could be there with poetry and with children, with adults too. It was, there was poetry and the people that lived there and me. And for example, since there was not a traditional written language, in some ways that we could, use words and emotions together in a way that I thought was a first for some children. Yeah. And teenage boys.
Teaching poetry to teenage boys. I think I'll ask one or two more questions because questions are coming in from the audience. Just moving from that topic, I think many of our students who are really interested in post and decolonial thought would be fascinated to know that you had audited classes with Gayatri Spivak, And you said that the theme of one course was about literature leaking into life. I just thought I would invite you to say more about that experience, or alternatively, who you're reading now, who you're interested in now in the realm of the philosophical or the theoretical.
Well, I just had a kind of a midlife crisis, and so a young woman I knew was taking Gayatri's class at Columbia. Well, I think it was, yeah, Columbia. And so I wrote her and asked if I could audit it. And she said yes. So it was unbelievable. It was a graduate class. I think that one, but I think, I mean, besides the brilliance, the strictness, the radical political engagement, I think the thing that was very impressive was the profound commitment to no closure. And I was very, very impressed by that, and how to live a life. And I think her commitment to teaching and to not to have closure was an incredible experience in the classroom. We didn't really get to this. You're asking me these questions. The leap into life was interrupted by 9/11. So I'm not really sure how that came out. But
Wow.
but I was also taking a class from a philosopher named Avital Ronell, and 9/11 happened, and she wanted to have her class anyway, because everyone was in such shock, and a few weeks a year, Derrida came and taught her class. So I remember the first day after we went to class, and Derrida gave this talk on forgiveness. And I think of deconstruction and what you said, post-colonial thought. I think of it with there's a loving impulse to what I got out of it, both from Derrida and from Gayatri. So that was right up my alley.
Wow, that is such an amazing thing to try to imagine. Those people together in a room at that time. Wow. So I think I'll just ask one more question. And I just really, I was so taken by something you said in an interview with Charles Bernstein about 10 years ago or so, that suffering isn't necessary. And this was in the context of a conversation about environmental illness. And it seems like such a hopeful thing to say when we're surrounded by so many vectors of conditions that feel apocalyptic. And I'm sort of wondering if that statement of yours still seems true to you.
Yeah, I don't know. I know what I meant, though, because I have a lifelong friend, the writer Leslie Silko, who wrote a novel called Ceremony. But she said to me once, human beings are meant to struggle. And I think that the suffering, because I think poets can have a tendency to, really sink into suffering. And I think that I was trying to say that if you take a step aside, you can disengage with the suffering, and it can be illuminated as struggle. And I think that's a spiritual practice that you can aspire to.
I think that leads beautifully to a question here from, I think it's Andrea Leal, who says, "It's a great honor to listen to you today. The Treatise on Stars is such a beautiful book. Every poem emanates so much love and hope. I am curious about some ideas and images in the poems that can be related to Buddhist philosophy. Could you share with us how you understand consciousness? How does consciousness include other beings? I love the way in which light and dark interact throughout the poems, and how darkness and not only light leads to awareness. How do you see darkness, the night sky, for connecting with other beings? Knowing the world seems to rest on our ability to acknowledge others through the body and not the mind." So that may be a complex of questions, but could you share with us how you understand consciousness and dark as opposed to enlightenment?
Okay, can you just read the last part of her question again about the embodiment?
Yes. So how do you see darkness for connecting with other beings? Knowing the world seems to rest on our ability to acknowledge others through the body and not the mind. And then Marcella Durand added, consciousness as night sky.
Yeah, that about answers the question. Well, I mean, I'm exploring right now. Well, and you also said it, that consciousness is a universal element or medium. And I like to say that it connects, we are connected, and that connection is love. That's a leap, but I want to say that. But also, I'm in exploring and intuiting things like there's something called sacred geometry, which I don't know what it is, but there's the dark energy, and then there's the other one, the dark, that there are underlying networks, energetic networks, of which we are part. And I choose to use that connection as part of love. So the dark and the light, I guess there's not so much difference except for your enjoyment. But there's the more you practice, the more you can feel your way beyond yourself and beyond your immediate aura, with others, and I have to say that with the recent experiences, that think that it's paralyzing, paralyzing that, but we have to do it anyway. And the Buddhist readings have been a consistent part of my life, of my studies from the very beginning. Blessings to Thich Nhat Hanh. I think I said I did read a book. I was reading a book. Now, what is the name of that book? I think it's called like Vegetal. It's like Plant Thinking, or it's by somebody named Martyr. And he seems to have written a lot of books. This book is really deconstruction of plant thinking using all the philosophy, the history of philosophy.
Is it Eduardo Kohn? How Plants Think?
No, there's a lot of poems with the word titles with thinking and plants, but this one, I could probably find it on my computer. His name is Martyr, and
Martyr Graft.
Marder.
Mm-hmm.
And he uses plants. Well, part of it is that they're always reaching out and growing, so that when there's no return to a center, and they're embedding themselves outside of themselves, and then and he calls that post-metaphysical. So I like that. So that's the book I'm reading.
Yeah, and Claire Pentecost tells us it's what a plant knows. Jacob Troya asks, you mentioned that a treatise on stars was meant to create an ecosystem with the earth and the stars. One ecosystem. I find the form of single line stanzas striking as nodes of intersection. The consistent full stop periods / question marks are complicated and challenging for me. I wonder how for you the self-contained units / sentences operate within an ecosystem of interconnectivity.
Yeah, I think I use my it's well known that I use appropriation for composition. So I read books and copy out, underline things, and then I put them in the computer and print them out and cut them up and put them all over. And the subsequent composition is really energized by or driven by my subconscious, because I don't really I don't make conscious decisions about which lines go next to others, like what makes my hand reach for this note and put it next to the other one. I trust, as what I've been talking about, trusting your intuition. But I trust, I go down to a level of the unconscious, and then I compose with that. And then, it's connected by definition. And once I have those, that first draft of these lines that are connected by my unconscious or unconsciously, then I do a lot of revision. And it's another where I said I try to see what it was that myself was telling myself. And then it achieves a kind of clarity that that actually revealed itself. I don't intend the things I say. I don't intend the clarity is like chipping away at something until it's revealed. I don't know if that answers his question.
Yeah, this actually relates to Hassan Mohammadi Dostar's question about how your writing flows. So you've already answered part of this, but the one part you haven't answered is, do you work in discontinuous bursts or over long periods, or does that change from place to place and poem to poem?
I read, I underline, I cut out the notes, and then the writing, usually I have to be, find some time where I can be alone to do the writing. And I do the writing for a poem in less than a week. And then the revision can take a long time. So I write about maybe 4 poems a year.
So when characters appear, like I read that the co-op checker doesn't really exist.
No.
Which was, I have to confess, that was something of a shock, that there's a character for everyone who doesn't know in a treatise on stars, who's sort of revealing to Mei-mei his experiences with extraterrestrials, or revealing to the speaker, or this anthropologist sort of persona. And so where does he arise from? He's not someone that was clipped out of another book.
Probably is clipped out from something, part of him, and then part of him was clipped out from something else. So I don't remember exactly what, but I read a lot of, I know that I read a lot of New Age books. And so a lot of them are narratives, so you can clip out parts of a narrative. I think people are prejudiced against New Age thought.
For sure. Famously, which I've now also told to my students, my dissertation advisor, who has the first blurb on a treatise on stars.
That was, you mean Charles Altieri?
Yeah.
Yeah, Charles, actually, that was part of a long letter he wrote telling me how much he didn't like the book.
He's very like that. If he doesn't, he'll also say things like, well, I didn't like history, so that whole 50 pages I didn't like. So, there's a lot of things he doesn't like. But collage is that a word that resonates with your process or not? Because
Sure, I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
And you could use that unification as the surface. The surface can be the unifying element. Assemblage or collage. Maybe assemblage more. Yeah.
You also used entwinement when thinking about the performance work. So it's interesting to think about how all of these things have to do with joining, the unlike, entwinement, assemblage, collage.
Yeah. I think that's sometimes I think I've said this, it comes from the fact that I was born in China and started in one language and then grew up in another language. So I'm always trying to connect, make these equivalences or connect things.
Yes, and that actually kind of leads to maybe what can be the last question, which is from Alessandro Minucci, which is, how do you feel when your poems are translated into another language?
Oh, I've read and enjoyed and been illuminated by so many works in translation all my life. that I feel there's some kind of magic that happens, and the translation, some magic happens, and you just can't get too involved in the literal, like back and forth. And so, I'm incredibly grateful when someone translates my work. There's a wonderful Swedish poet, and I'll think of her name after a while, that's translating. She's a really good poet herself, and the way the way she engages in the work, and then comes out, with the translation, there's got to be magic because of the depth. It's not about a one-to-one correlation. Yeah. How do you feel about translation?
I am a proponent. My colleague Hans Sassi was here, and yeah, we've been propagandizing in favor of exploratory translation for years together. So, and I think that's a beautiful way to sort of bring us to a close, thinking about, the translingual matrix of your experience and how that's almost a kind of invisible, factor leading you to connect, system with system, unlike things, and the way that you embrace translation as an alchemical process. There's so much skepticism around translation, and so narrow a definition of translation still in the literary marketplace. So I love hearing that.
The Swedish poet's name is Anne Jaderland, Jaderland. She's a wonderful poet. I'm glad I remembered her name.
And it's a beautiful language. So it'd be fun to hear those poems in Swedish. Well, we're coming up on 7:30.
Wow,
so
it went by so fast.
Yeah, and I want to thank all those who came out tonight, and hopefully those who couldn't make it might be able to catch up with it later. It was such a pleasure to be in dialogue with you and to hear those poems. Thank you everyone for coming, but thank you, Mei-mei, and thank you also to Starsha Gill, who has made so many of these convergences possible under conditions that seemed quite impossible. And we're getting a lot of thank yous. And by the way, those who asked the questions, we're very grateful for your
thank you for those
generous answers.
Questions, amazingly profound and deep questions.
Wonderful. Well, some of us who are students and maybe a couple of professors, including this one, will see you tomorrow. So
did you tell them to have a plant with them?
Yes, and they'll be bringing their plants and a piece of paper and pencil. So good night, everyone. And yeah, I think it's time to say goodbye. And Mei-mei, I will talk with you in a moment. Okay.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Everybody.